Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today is obviously May 1st, 2026, and now at the start of the month, I'm doing my updated 2026 US Senate elections predictions. So we have a lot to get through in this video, so we're going to get started right away. On the current map right now, without assigning any states to the Democrats and Republicans, the Democrats come into this election with 34 senators, Republicans come in with 31. The current Senate map right now is Republicans hold 53 Senate seats, Democrats hold 47. So the Republicans have the majority in the U.S. Senate right now. Without further ado, I'm not going to kind of brush by quickly the Senate races that we know are not going to be too competitive, so we can spend more time focusing on the ones that we can expect will be very competitive. So first, we're going to start from west to east, and we're going to go with the states that are considered to be safe for the Democrats. So the Senate race in Oregon is going to be safe, as well as Colorado. New Mexico is safe, as the Republicans could not field a candidate for the general election, so New Mexico is safe pretty much by proxy. The Senate race in Illinois at this time is considered to be a safe Democratic Senate race. Mark Warner in Virginia is right on the edge of being safe and likely, but I would err on the side of it being a safe Democratic race. The Republicans don't really have too much of an opportunity in that race. The question is just whether it's over 15 points or not when everything is said and done, but ultimately I think that it will be. The Senate race in Delaware, I think, is also a safe Democratic win, as well as Cory Booker's Senate race in New Jersey. The Rhode Island Senate race with Jack Reed will be safe. Ed Markey versus Seth Moulton in the Democratic primary. Massachusetts, I think Ed Markey is going to pull that out and win, but even if he doesn't, Seth Moulton, Ed Markey, either one, the Democrat will win against John Deaton in the safe Democratic category in the general election. So those are all the updated safe seats for the Democrats, and that brings the Democrats up to about 43. Now, the Republicans do have a good number of Senate races as well that are considered safe for them at this current point in time. The first would be in the state of Idaho. Next would be the state of Wyoming. South Dakota would be safe. Oklahoma would be safe. Louisiana with Bill Cassidy, who is potentially going to be primary challenge. We'll have to wait and see how that ultimately goes. But as for the general election, that should be a safe race. Arkansas, I believe, with Tom Cotton, that one should be safe as well. Alabama should be safe. Tennessee should be safe. Kentucky should be safe, even with Mitch McConnell retiring. West Virginia should be safe as well. So without anything really else thrown into it, Republicans should be safe to win 41 U.S. Senate seats. Democrats safe to win 43. Now, there are a few Senate races as well for the Republicans that are right around the edge of being a safe Republican seat or potentially falling into likely. The first one I want to point out is the Senate race in the state of Kansas, which I am currently putting as safe Republican. But Kansas, I did see a new poll that came out not too long ago from an independent candidate, and this candidate's name is Adam Hamilton, who is a pastor. And in that poll, which I believe was an internal poll, it showed him leading the Republican Roger Marshall by around 2 points, while the other polls, matchups in the poll were Republican leading by 10. So for now, I'm putting Kansas in the safe Republican category, but that is one I am keeping an eye on very closely because that Senate race could get competitive very narrowly as well. Next, I'm going to go up to the state of Montana. Montana is going to be interesting because this is now an open Senate race, but what's interesting this is the independent candidate Seth Bodner represents the Democrats' best chance at actually winning this race. The Republican's going to be Kurt Alme, and on the Democratic side, there is a few Democrats running. The most notable is State Representative or former State Representative Riley Neal. As for the general election, it's still listed as likely Republican, but in a multi-candidate race, it looks more likely than not that Steve Daines would win by a safe Republican margin. If the Democrat drops out and Seth Bodner is the candidate, it is certainly a likely Republican margin. So for now, I'm going to put Montana to reflect how competitive it's been on the Bodner matchup into likely Republican, but come election day, if there's a Democrat and Seth Bodner in the race, I'll be shifting it down to safe Republican, as I don't think the Democrats have much of a chance in that race with Bodner in the race as well. So something's going to have to give on that one in that race if they want it to be competitive. Next, I'm going to go to the state of Minnesota. This is an open Senate race with Tina Smith retiring, but I would put it in the likely Democratic category. And the reason for doing this is Minnesota At the Senate level has not really been too competitive. The most recent election that was competitive was Tina Smith's first special election, and there was a heavy amount of vote splitting in that one, which is why it ended up being so close. On the Democratic side, Angie Craig and Peggy Flanagan are fighting out the Democratic primary right now. I would say Flanagan is a slight favorite in that one, but we'll have to wait and see. On the Republican side, I would say Michelle Tafoya is the most likely candidate to be the Republican nominee. It's listed as likely Democrat across the board, and the only poll from Emerson from Angie Craig versus Tafoya was a 7-point lead for the Democrats, 6 points for Flanagan versus Tafoya as well, both of which fall into the likely Democratic category. So Minnesota, I would put into the likely Democratic category. The next state that I would put into likely right now would be the state of South Carolina with U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham. Now, Lindsey Graham here, let me pull up the U.S. Senate map as well, just to get back to the map before that. South Carolina, with Lindsey Graham is going to be interesting because Lindsey Graham underperformed in 2020, only winning by around 10 points against Jamie Harrison. The Democrats don't have a super strong candidate this time around that can defeat Lindsey Graham, but it's more of a situation of his own unpopularity that I think may make this race competitive. The most recent poll from Lindsey Graham versus Annie Andrews showed it a 5-point race, albeit it is Impact Research, which is sponsored by Andrews' campaign and is a Democratic pollster. The predictions are split likely and safe across the board for the Republicans. I do think Lindsey Graham is favored to hold on, and I do think ultimately that he will, but I'm putting South Carolina in a likely Republican instead of safe Republican at this time. Similar situation in the state of Florida, but not less so about popularity, more so that Florida with U.S. Senator Ashley Moody. She is running for her first term after being appointed to fill the rest of Marco Rubio's term. This is a special election in the state. She'll be facing off against likely Democratic candidate Alex Vindman in the general election. It's split between solid Republican, likely Republican, and lean Republican. The most recent poll from Stetson University showed it a 7-point race with 9% undecided, so this could certainly go above 15 points. We did see in 2024, though, that Rick Scott won by about 12.8% in the likely Republican column. In 2026, which should be a more friendly year for the Democrats than 2024 was, I think we'll see Florida stay under 15 points, putting Florida into the likely Republican category. Next, we're going to go to the neighboring state of Mississippi, a state that is usually a very Republican solid state, but this Senate race I'm putting as likely for the Republicans, and I'm going to explain why. This Senate race is U.S. Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith, who won her Senate election back in 2020, also by a competitive margin of roughly around 10 points over her Democratic opponent, Mike Espy. On the Democratic side this time around will be Democratic candidate Scott Collum. As for the general election, though, it's still solid Republican from 3 out of the 4 prediction rankings, but the two most recent polls, including one that came out just a few weeks ago from Impact Research, which is a Democratic poll sponsored by a group that opposes Cindy Hyde-Smith, shows Smith versus Collum at roughly about a 3-point race. Even adjusting for the Democratic bias of the poll, which on average for my rankings is about 5 points, that would still put it around an 8-point lead for Cindy Hyde-Smith, putting it in likely Democrat. This race could ultimately end up not being this way and end up being a lot more Republican, but for now I'm erring on the side of caution and putting Mississippi as likely Republican as of right now. Next, we're going to go to the state of Nebraska, where this is going to be Republican Senator Pete Ricketts taking on independent candidate Dan Osborne. Now, this race, we're starting to get into the races that are more talked about as the potential competitive toss-up races. This one's going to be interesting as Dan Osborne did very well in the 2024 election, losing to Deb Fischer, the Republican incumbent, and that one by 6.7%. Now it's going to be a tougher election environment for the Republicans, which should aid Osborne's chances, but it's also going to be against a Republican candidate in Pete Ricketts, who heading into this race was more popular and will likely take Osborne's candidacy a lot more serious. It's listed as likely Republican from most of the political prediction websites. The early polling thus far, all from Democratic polling sources though, have shown it to be a very tight race of about a 1-point lead. But again, adjusting my 5 points to account for the bias of the pollster, that would put it just right around 5 to 6 points, right outside that margin. So for now, Nebraska starts out as likely for the Republicans, but that is also one I'm keeping an eye on very closely to see how that develops over the coming months. Republicans, just to update you, are at 47 Senate seats. Democrats are at 44. Next, we're going to go to the state of Iowa, right next door to Nebraska, and this is a very interesting Senate race as well. Iowa typically a state that's usually more Republican and doesn't have too competitive of a race, but this time around it might be more competitive than usual. U.S. Senator Joni Ernst has decided to retire and not run for re-election. U.S. Representative Ashley Hinson will be the Republican candidate. On the Democratic side, Josh Turek and Zach Walz are currently fighting out the Democratic primary, and we'll have to wait and see how that all squares away. Right now, Zach Walz is leading in every single poll thus far, but again, we'll have to wait for the primary to see ultimately how it shakes out. This race is listed as likely Republican from 3 out of the 4 prediction sites. Race to the White House does have it as a toss-up. Though one most recent poll for Echelon Insights, a Republican-aligned pollster, shows Josh Turek leading 46 to 45. But the 2 Democratic polls before that in March and January showed Ashley Hinson leading by a lean Republican margin. Zach Walz was up 2 points over Hinson in the Echelon Insights poll, and it was a lean margin before that. So the political prediction rankings have it likely Republican. The polling currently has it as lean Republican or toss-up depending on the poll you're looking at. Essentially, Iowa right now, its polling is always a little bit murky. It's always a little tricky to tell how Iowa is going to go. Ernst did win by 6.5% in 2020. For now, it's going to be very close. I am narrowly shifting Iowa down into lean Republican, but really it's about a 5.5% win at this current point in time, so it's just barely in that lean Republican category. But Iowa, I do have in the Republicans' direction as of right now. Next, we're going to go to the state of New Hampshire. New Hampshire is a state that Jeanne Shaheen won in 2020 handedly, winning the state by 15.6% against the Republican Corky Mesner. But this time around, New Hampshire is going to be a lot more competitive as the Republicans have a much better and more qualified candidate running in this race. First, though, U.S. Representative Chris Pappas will be running to succeed U.S. Senator Jeanne Shaheen and will be the Democratic nominee. The Republican side, 2 former U.S. senators are running, in Scott Brown and John E. Sununu, the former U.S. senator. Based on the polling data, John E. Sununu should win this primary without really too much of a problem, though there is still a large amount of undecided vote. Sununu is already breaking 50% in the polling averages for this race. As for the general election, the political prediction websites, 3 out of the 4 have it as lean for Chris Pappas for the Democrats. In this race, Pappas is leading Scott Brown by over 10 points. For Sununu versus Pappas is a lot more of a competitive race, though. On average, about a 3 to 4 point lead out of 2 out of the 3 rankings for Pappas over Sununu. On average, across all of them, Pappas is leading by 4.4. The most recent poll from the University of New Hampshire showed Pappas leading Sununu by about 7 points. Emerson College's most recent poll had it at a 1-point race. In St. Anselm College before that had it at a 3-point race. Clearly, there are a lot of undecided voters left to go in this race, given that Pappas is polling on average around 46.5, and Sununu's down at 42.3, with still 11% undecided left to go. This race, depending on how the midterms election environment go, could break one way or the other, and the margins could certainly exceed 5%, but for now, I think Chris Pappas is favored to hold it, and to do so by around a little bit under a 5-point margin. So I would start New Hampshire off in this election video in lean Democrat in a similar category as Iowa for right now. But a very competitive election in New Hampshire, which the last 2 Senate cycles did not have, is going to be very interesting to keep an eye out for. So that is the state of New Hampshire. Now we're going to go to the state of Texas, where Texas, there's a very interesting race underway as well, and we may be seeing Texas be competitive at the general election cycle once again. The main hiccup on this race thus far is what's going to happen on the Republican primary. We know Democrat James Talarico won the primary against Jasmine Crockett. He will be the Democrat taking on the Republicans. The question will be who the Republicans will be. Will it be U.S. Senator John Cornyn or Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton? For a while, it's looked like Ken Paxton's had the lead in most of these polls. Heading into the runoff, Ken Paxton actually trailing John Cornyn in the 2 most recent polls with a ton of undecided voters left to go. We have to wait and see how that all sorts out. As for the general election, it's currently listed as likely Republican from 3 out of the 4 prediction sources. On the polling side of things, though, John Cornyn versus James Talarico is showing to be a very competitive race, with most polls under 5 points. The 2 most recent Democratic polls have Talarico leading over Cornyn by 2 points and 1 point respectively. For Paxton versus Talarico, the findings there are very similar, though more of the polls like Emerson showed it a tied race from back in January. Emerson versus Talarico was around a 3-point race. So we have to wait and see whether it's Cornyn or Paxton, how it all ultimately shakes out. But right now, I would still start Texas out as a lean Republican win at this current point in time. I do think it's going to fall under 5 points, though. Whether it's Cornyn or Talarico, this is going to be a very competitive race. But I would certainly bet if it's Paxton versus Talarico, it's going to be a lot closer and gives the Democrats the best chance at winning it. But for now, I'd put Texas as lean Republican, and we're waiting on Cornyn versus Paxton to see ultimately how it all shakes out. With that, now with Texas in the category, we're getting into the states that are really viewed as the main battlegrounds of the 2026 Senate cycle. Not that Texas, Iowa, and New Hampshire can't flip to their respective other parties, but they've not been talked about as much as the ones most likely to flip, like, say, North Carolina or Maine or Georgia or Michigan have. Ohio and Alaska are kind of special cases, but we'll get to that in just one moment. First things first, we're going to take a look at the state we're going to start actually with the state of Michigan. Michigan's a Senate race that's looking to be very competitive this time around and one of the best pickup opportunities for the Republicans. Now, one of the reasons being is the Republican primary is essentially all locked up with Mike Rogers, the nominee from 2024, who only narrowly lost the Senate race to Elisa Slotkin by 0.34%, being the Republican nominee again. The Democrats have a very competitive primary underway between Abdul El-Sayed, Mallory McMorrow, and Haley Stevens, which at this current point in time is a complete neck race that we're going to have to wait and see how it ultimately all unfolds. So that primary is going to make things very interesting for the general election. And depending on which candidate wins the primary, may decide which candidate wins this race. Haley Stevens is leading Mike Rogers by about 2 points on the averages. Abdul El-Sayed is trailing Mike Rogers by around 3 points on the polling averages, and Mike Rogers is very narrowly leading Mallory McMorrow by just about under 1 point at this current point in time in this race. So really, based on the polling, it's very contingent which Democrat wins, how this race starts out. Though there's a considerable amount of undecided vote in all three of these matchups, around 11% or more. Ultimately, how this all shakes out is a very close, competitive race, but in a presidential midterm year like 2026 is, with President Trump's approval ratings currently sitting at negative 16.2%, I'm going to err on the side of a midterm wave, and I don't think the Republicans are going to flip a Democratic Senate seat in the state of Michigan with a candidate that couldn't win with Donald Trump at the top of the ticket in 2024. I think it's a close race, but I think it's the one the Democrats narrowly hold by under 5 points, but more than 1 point. So Michigan, I have starting as lean Democratic. Next, we're going to go up to the state of Maine with Democratic U.S. Senate candidate Graham Plattner and Democratic Governor Janet Mills looking to take on Susan Collins, the Republican incumbent senator. Now, we know Collins is going to be the Republican nominee. Again, on the Democratic side, it will look like it could have been a very competitive primary, but now Graham Plattner seems to really be running away with it. Still with about 13.4% of primary voters undecided, Plattner's already breaking 50% in this Democratic primary and is looking like he'll be the nominee. Now, as for the Senate rankings, for the predictions, sort of all over the place right now. Inside Elections has it tilt Republican, Click Politico has it toss-up, The Economist and Race to the White House have it favored for the Democrats. Sabato's Crystal Ball has it as a toss-up. For Janet Mills versus Susan Collins, Mills holds a very slight lead of 0.3%. But with Graham Plattner likely to win, his numbers make a little bit more importance for this. And it is showing Graham Plattner with a likely Democratic lead over Susan Collins right now, up to 48.2%. Collins is at 41.4%, and other undecideds at 10.4%. Clearly, with a lot of undecided voters left to go, still 10.4%, but Plattner is opening up a large lead over Susan Collins to start out. The reason I think this race is still going to be under 5 points, though, is Susan Collins showed this in 2020. She was able to win a very hard race in an election where the polling also showed her getting trounced in the final few days. So I think it still falls under 5 points and may even go to ranked choice voting. But I do think Graham Plattner is narrowly favored and will win the Maine Senate race as of today and give the seat a Democratic flip from red to blue. The first on the Senate map thus far. But Maine Senate race is going to be very interesting to keep an eye out for. But Plattner right now is favored to beat Susan Collins. Democrats are at 47, Republicans still at 49. Now we're going to go to the state of Georgia. Georgia, this is Democratic U.S. Senator Jon Ossoff, who was elected. Actually, I forgot to show Susan Collins' numbers as well. She won by 8.6% in the 2020 election, narrowly avoiding ranked choice voting against Sarah Gideon. Jon Ossoff won his Senate race in 2020 and then in the 2021 runoff by 1.2% against U.S. Senator David Perdue, who did win on the initial ballot but did not break 50%. Now he is running for a full second term in the U.S. Senate, and this is going to be an interesting race. Once Brian Kemp passed on this race, it seemed the Republicans really lost a lot of the wind of their sails of trying to flip this race. There's a competitive primary underway between Mike Collins, Buddy Carter, and Derek Dooley. The early polling shows Mike Collins as the leading Republican right now, but still a lot of undecided vote left for grabs in this primary, so this can certainly go any way for any of the candidates as of right now, though I think the betting would say that Mike Collins will probably be the Republican candidate. As for the predictions, 3 out of the 4 have it favored for Jon Ossoff at either lean Democrat or even likely Democrat from race to the White House. Ossoff's leading Carter by about 3 points, leading Mike Collins by about 3.2, and Derek Dooley by about 6.75. Again, just to give you a look, Kemp versus Ossoff, though it was very early in 2025, Kemp had about a 3-point lead. The only Republican that I think could have won this race, and it's still not out of the woods 100%, but Jon Ossoff is certainly favored in this race. Kemp may have made this race a possible Republican flip, but Ossoff is leading against all 3 candidates by a lean margin at the absolute lowest. I do think since it is Georgia, it's going to be competitive, but I do think Jon Ossoff is narrowly going to hold Georgia and win it in a lean Democratic category. And he may even win it without having to go to a runoff and may win it outright on election night, which both he and Warnock were not able to do in 2020 or 2022. This time around, I think that he will. So this puts the Democrats at 48 Senate seats. Republicans are at 49. Next, we're going to go to the state of North Carolina, a state that Republicans desperately need to hold, but the Democrats right now are running a very, very strong race and looks like they may be in a strong position to flip it. This is RNC Chair Michael Whatley, who's running to replace U.S. Senator Thom Tillis and former Democratic Governor Roy Cooper of the state of North Carolina. In these predictions, lean Democrat from Cook Political Report, likely Democrat from race to the White House, Inside Elections Tableau Crystal Ball have it listed as a toss-up. The polling data thus far, though, is showing Roy Cooper currently running away with the race at roughly about a 9-point lead on the average of averages in this race. Now, where things currently stand is Cooper around 48.8%, Michael Whatley's down at 39.8%, with still 11.4%. To me, this screams a lot of voters in North Carolina do not know who Michael Whatley is. He does not have very high name ID, and come the November 2026 election, all the voters that are getting out that are going to vote Republican are going to ultimately end up voting for Michael Whatley. So I don't think Roy Cooper is going to win this race by 9 points. That's what the lead is right now. I think Michael Whatley will probably get up to at least around 45 to 46% of the vote. It does still open the door up for a Roy Cooper likely Democratic win, but one I think he'll win by under 5 points given the competitive nature of North Carolina. Still, Roy Cooper winning this Senate race is a Democratic flip and an absolutely huge, crucial one, as this is the first Democrat to win a Senate race since I believe it was the late Senator Kay Hagan who won the Senate race, I believe in 2008 or 2006. I do believe it was 2008 against the Republican back then, who then lost the race to Thom Tillis in 2014. So now North Carolina and Maine, based on the current Senate map, are now flips for the Democrats. Next, we're going to move to the state of Ohio. This is going to be an interesting matchup of U.S. Senator Jon Husted, who was appointed to fill the term of J.D. Vance when he became Vice President of the United States. He was selected by Governor Mike DeWine to be the candidate. He'll be facing off against former U.S. Senator Sherrod Brown, who just lost the 2024 very close Senate race in Ohio to Bernie Moreno by only 3.6%. Now Sherrod Brown is running as the challenger, not the incumbent, but in a much more blue election environment, which is shaping up to be a very close race. Inside Elections has it listed as tilt for the Republicans. Cook Politico toss-up, Tableau Crystal Ball, lean Republican. Race to the White House has it as a toss-up. The polling averages, though, now all have Jon Husted leading by an average of about 3 points, 49 to 46, with still 5 points undecided, boosted in the last few weeks of some good polls for Jon Husted, with Sherrod Brown getting around that similar 45 to 46 point margin. This is certainly going to be a very close race, one that seems to be reminiscent of the 2024 Senate race, and one that if the undecideds all ultimately break for Sherrod Brown can certainly win if the Democrats have a 2018 type Democratic midterm, but this is a race that I think John Husted at this current point in time is narrowly favored to hold on to, and he'll win this race and win a first full 6-year term in the U.S. Senate as of right now. I have him winning in a lean margin of right around that 3-point margin, but Ohio is certainly a close one to watch and see how it develops over the next few months, as this race is certainly not out of grasp of either candidate. With that, Republicans are now at 50, Democrats are at 49, and the Republicans, due to having Vice President J.D. Vance, do ultimately win control of the Senate as they hold the tiebreaker. But we have one more Senate race left to go, and that is the state of Alaska, where an absolutely fascinating Senate race is underway in this state. Alaska, which is usually a very red Republican state at the presidential and Senate level, voted for Dan Sullivan, the Republican incumbent, by 12.7% in 2020. But this time around, looking like this could be very close, because former Democratic Representative Mary Peltola is running to be the Democratic candidate. She will be the Democratic candidate in advance to the general election. Now, she ran for the House in 2024 after winning it in 2022, and she only lost by right around 2 points in 2024 for that House race. So she is now running in 2026, which is expected to be a much more Democratic-friendly election environment, as I have said. Now, this is one where the predictions in the polls are showing two different things right now. The predictions, 3 out of the 4 of them currently have it listed as lean Republican. Inside Elections, Cook Political Report, and Sabado's Crystal Ball all agree that it is lean for the Republicans. Ray Snow White House has it as a toss-up. On the polling averages, though, Mary Peltola is currently leading at 48.1, Dan Sullivan's at 44.7, with roughly 7.2% undecided. So Mary Peltola currently has a 3-point Democratic lead. This is going to be a very fascinating race where it seems to be all over the place right now. Dan Sullivan, as the incumbent, is polling down around 43 to 44%. And the question is going to be ultimately, do these numbers end up being correct? As Alaska Survey Research and the Democratic Public Policy Polling and Data for Progress are the only polls in this race thus far. So the only non-biased poll we have is Alaska Survey Research, who did underestimate President Trump's support in their final poll by around 3 points last time around. That being said, that would still put this at right around a tied race. At this current point in time, I am giving the state of Alaska the title as the most competitive battleground state in the 2026 U.S. Senate elections, one that I think Mary Peltola very well could win by ranked choice voting, or Dan Sullivan could win by ranked choice voting. This one's very, very close. It can certainly go either way. At this current point in time, I'm narrowly erring on the side of caution and putting it in tilt Republican, meaning Dan Sullivan wins by 1 point after ranked choice voting and the runoff is needed. But Alaska is a very close Senate race that the Democrats may very well end up winning. So my prediction for the 2026 U.S. Senate elections as of May 1st, 2026 is the Republicans win 51 Senate seats, Democrats win 49 in a very hard-fought election for 2026 that certainly has gotten a lot more Democratic friendly than it was a few months ago. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe. If you did, leave all your comments down below about Senate races you think are going to go and how you think the Senate map will ultimately look. Again, please remember to hit like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in a future video.